As we look at Chapter 10 on authentic leadership, I would encourage you to have the textbook in front of you. I'm going to make a few references as we page through the deck. We'll page through the chapter as well, because there's some great quotes that are embedded in this chapter that are good references that you can underline and go back to as you start to work your assignment for the week. So let's dive into Chapter 10, Authentic Leadership. And we've talked about within this course about how history truly does impact how people want to see their leaders. And the same is very true with authentic leadership. You'll see it's a newer model for leadership. And you'll see on page 205, it automatically dives into just the 9/11 experiences and then the WorldCom Enron collapses, if you will. And just people losing faith, if you will. Not faith from a religious perspective, but more faith in people. Skepticism was on the rise, and people wanting to recognize that they wanted more out of life than just work. So I thought that it would be valuable to flip some of the slides around. This slide usually comes at the end of the chapter, and I thought it'd be good to include this in the beginning. Is when you think about the application of this authentic leadership model, the one thing that I want to accentuate from this slide, or there's two things actually. One is that it is a lifelong learning process in that first bullet. And the second one's in the third bullet, which is really about that leaders are always trying to do the right things. And you can see in the rest of the sentence here, to be honest with themselves and others and to work for the common good. Kind of draws back on our generosity quotient, but you see nothing in there that's talking about being the company man or the company woman or making much profits for the company or making as much money for themselves. I mean, you think back in the 80s in the time of yuppies and whatnot, this thought would be a little bit foreign at that point, and it's really a powerful statement that it's coming loud and clear out today. And so let's dig a little deeper, if you will. You're going to find a couple of different descriptions and definitions as you work through the couple of first pages in the chapter. The one that I'd like to call out on page 206, the second to last paragraph at the bottom, the second line in that paragraph is what goes on within the leader. And it's funny, I just met this past week with a group of young adults that were starting to interview for their next job, and a lot of what we talked about was really understanding who the person was that they were going to work for. And one of the examples I gave was, if you meet with this person for an hour and there's no laughter, that's probably their best face they're putting on. So it's recognizing that what they as people are longing for these trustworthy leaders, as you see in the second bullet, there is really an opportunity to draw out who the person is you're working for, rather than just what's the company, what's the job, what's the salary. And as you can see at the top, it really focuses on whether the leader is genuine and consistently genuine. The second definition gets into, you'll see these next two slides have two different lists, and this is really about an intrapersonal definition, as you see at the top of page 207. Exhibit genuine leadership, lead from conviction, are originals, not copycats. They stand for themselves. They don't stand for, I want to be like somebody else. And then the last piece is that they base their actions, all of their actions, on their values, and they stay true to that throughout the course of their career. This next definition gets into a developmental definition. So whereas interpersonal is how people work together, this developmental definition is what can you really grow at. And as you see, a lot of this is triggered by major life events. I met with a colleague a couple of weeks ago, and she's doing really, really well in her career, and her mother recently and sadly passed from breast cancer. And that event for her made her realize that working at a Fortune 100 company was not what she wanted to do. She wanted to lead a nonprofit that she was passionately tied to. And you see more and more people that want to do that because of a life experience. And some people do it in their social and their board involvement and their family involvement. And other people want to do it with their profession. And there's no wrong or right way to do that. It's just those life events trigger something for you. But you can see that from a developmental perspective, people can always grow at self-awareness. They can grow in internalizing their moral perspective. They can grow in that balanced processing, and even the relational transparency transparency is so key with this authentic leadership. Is really, being who you say you are, and really, recognizing that. Joe and I, as we're writing this book, we talk about a term called professional authenticity, which is, bringing the true you to work. And the reality is that you do need to have some filter, because it's not like, when people ask you, what'd you do this weekend, that they really want to know everything, but they want to know who you are, and they want to connect with you that way. And Joe always tells the story of, think about it when you're driving off the ramp, driving into work, and you get off the exit ramp, and you get to that light, and we always say you're jamming to this radio, you're playing in your car, and you're listening to U2's I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, and it's rocking, and you're just singing at the top of your lungs, and you've got a imaginary group of 18,000 people that are asking you to give you their money's worth, and you're screaming and yelling and singing, and boom, all of a sudden you turn to your right and you see Gail from accounting, and you shut down. You don't even whisper a word in the song anymore, because you know that if Gail from accounting sees you singing and that makes it back to the water cooler, you're toast. You're just, that's not a good thing for you, your persona, your career, whatever. And so, the question is, when you talk about that transparency, can you really be yourself at work? And yourself, and I remember talking about this with a colleague of mine I went through a leadership program with, is an Asian American lawyer that doesn't work for the same company I do, but she talked about how it's challenging for her at times to be an Asian American female lawyer. Bringing that to work every day is something that she actually needs to think about. All food for thought as you kind of think about, you can develop this and grow stronger and more confident and more skilled in these four components at the bottom of the slide. And then going back to the interpersonal, the intrapersonal is the first one. This interpersonal is the third part of the definition. And I think this is where the rest of the chapter, if you can take one term away, it's followership. Is that we've studied leadership through most of this book, and we really haven't talked about followership. But really, authentic leadership is what generates loyal followership, and that's where this buy-in comes in. I know people that I've worked for in my career, and why am I still working for them? Because I'm loyal to them because I believe in them. I believe in their values. I believe in who they are as people. I know there's, all of us probably know of instances where we could go find another job that would make more money, but is it working for someone that we'd really respect? And the fact that we actually evaluate that in our decision-making process shows that authentic leadership is taking more of a presence in our lives today. So there is some research. It's pretty recent, as you can see. Research that's, in this case, just about 20 years old, is very, very recent. You see the two core leadership questions, and it goes into Terry's visual model. It's on the bottom of page 209 and on the next slide here. What's really, really going on, and what are we going to do about it? And the idea is that you can use this model to really call out and truly understand where the actions are needed to get to that fulfillment. The one that I always find that's interesting, and that oftentimes some of these aspects can interact and almost contradict each other, is that power and existence. The history and the energy oftentimes are linked, because you can see where the flow of power is coming from based on examining the history. And then you wonder whether our values really defining the current state, or is it the history that's influencing how people see the current state? Are we really being true about how we and where we sit today, or is it more that we understand where we came from and therefore we're kind of letting it happen to us? So this wheel represents some of the different aspects that Terry brings into his model. The second model that we'll look at is Bill George, and he's much more quote-unquote mainstream and popular, probably has one of the most popular books on authentic leadership out there. And if you find this model interesting, I would encourage you to pick it up. He looks at 5 characteristics, and you can see them there: the purpose, values, trusting relationships. Trust, we talked about in earlier chapters, huge right now. Self-discipline and action from the heart related to that person's mission. And let's take a look at his visual here, and you can see the connection points between the inner ring and the outer ring. So like starting at about, let's start up at the north, which is what Bill George often talks about as their true north. And you can see that in the text on 213. But passion is driven and connected to purpose. Behavior is driven and connected to values. Connectedness and that sense of community is related to relationships. Consistency is related to self-discipline. You can see how volatility is the antonym in this case for self-discipline, and that consistency over time creates authenticity. Is we know what this person stands for. And the last piece is the compassion related to the heart, and this is not meant to be soft or hokey. It's meant to be something that is contagious, something that's inspirational, and something definitely that can be very profitable in creating followership, in creating leadership, in creating organizations that move forward and are productive. So when you look at the basic model here, there's a couple other components, and you can read through these. Again, the balance processing is the one that I want to call out because it's systemic, it's predictable, but from the vantage point that it's objective and very important to understand that. Other things that are important to understand are the antecedents to the influence, and we talked about the life-changing events, but even the positive psychological capacities you see up front, and then just the greater good. A lot of these are related back to things that we've talked about in previous chapters, but it frames it out different with authentic leadership. So in conclusion, the strengths of this model are really around this trust. It's a practical and theoretical approach, and it's something that can be learned, and it's something that can be measured. It's related to some of the other models we've talked about as well, but it's very, very young, and so I think there's a decent amount of skepticism. People want to believe it's true, but haven't really seen over a long period of time whether it positively impacts a leader's career or positively impacts the productivity of a leader or a leadership culture of an organization. The moral component isn't fully explained, and that obviously that gets somewhat subjective, because what one person seems is good and right may be different than what another person seems is good and right. But some interesting points. So I think you'll find the chapter very valuable to read through. And on the bottom of 214, there's a reference to the book 3 Cups of Tea. If you have not read that book, not related to this course, but just in general, absolutely one of my top 5 ever. It's just a great read about a situation that has not telling a story of leadership, but indirectly, it's just a wonderful story. So I would encourage